Hello everybody, it's Elagatua and I'm back for another replay review of the Quack Cup 6 Fog Tags. And I'm going to lead into this video with a hypothetical for you to ponder. Imagine if you took a 1700 ELO player and you gave them a tier 4 Luxio, and then you had them play against an 1100 ELO player, but they got to play with a tier 1 CO. You think that'd be a fair matchup? Who do you think would win? It's kind of a fun thought experiment, but when we get to the game, we will see what happens when a tier 4 Lux CO goes up against a tier 1 CO, and we will see the results. Don't worry about any other details. So, let's talk about this round of the Quack Cup 6. The tiers for this are pretty non-traditional in terms of fog tiering. So I'm going to pull up an image of the tiers. Maybe I'll just overlay it on the screen so we can kind of look at it. All right, I've overlaid it here, and this isn't really the easiest way to look at it because there's just a bunch of checkboxes. So I'm just going to talk through the interesting tidbits. So on the left side, this is our slot with more options available to us. And the most notable ones that you want to look at are going to be Javier, who's normally a tier 1 CO. And then you've also got Max, who is normally a tier 2 CO. And the other tier 2 COs are not available. So Eagle and Olaf, not going to be there. And also the rest of the tier 1 COs, also unavailable. And then Drake from tier 3 and Kindle from tier 3 as well. So the other kind of tier 3 COs are largely available. But you've got Javier and Max mixed into the pool. And then on your second CO slot, we're basically looking at only tier 4 COs. But we do have the Luxios enabled because it is a Quack Cup. So that is kind of interesting. So maybe let's take a moment and just kind of discuss the strategy behind the tiering, and kind of how I think this plays out. I think we've seen a number of different ideas, and I think the top players have had a pretty wide variety of different CO picks. But because the first slot has some pretty high tier COs and the second slot has only tier 4 COs, whatever CO you're picking as your higher tier CO is going to be a lot more important than what you pick as your tier 4 CO. And the 3 COs that we've seen picked more than any other as the primary CO are going to be Javier, Max, and Drake. So let me explain why that is, and why that kind of makes sense, and why you're not likely to want anybody else aside from those 3. So Javier is going to give you plus 10 defense when you have the comm tower. And additionally, Javier's charge meter is pretty small, and once you get up to that CO power, you're going to get a turn with plus 30 defense and plus 20 attack, assuming you have your comm tower. And on this map, the comm tower is not something that you can really threaten at all. So that's a very safe thing to have. That's pretty strong. Plus 10 defense is very, very good. It makes your infantry engagements very, very strong. It allows you to sit on cities and be very safe, and not necessarily have to worry about what your opponent has in the area, because you know that if you're keeping your units on high defense terrain and fights break out, you're likely going to be winning when all is said and done. That's Javier. tier 1 CO, definitely a good pick. Why would Javier be allowed in a tags pool with other tier 2 and tier 3 COs when none of the other tier 1 COs are available? Clearly, somebody thinks that Javier is downgraded in tags compared to the other COs. Otherwise, like, everybody should just choose him because he's the tier 1 CO, right? Well, the one disadvantage of Javier is Javier's CO power is primarily like a defensive power. And so the benefit you're getting from that power largely comes from having it active on your opponent's turn, because you're getting that plus 30 defense, which is basically turning roads into cities and cities into double cities. And it's a pretty substantial advantage, but you need to still have the power active on your opponent's turn. And often what is happening in these tags is that you use your CO power and then you immediately swap to your secondary CO at the end of your turn, and that actually deactivates your power. So that's a very powerful strategy, because you use your CO power, you swap to your other CO, and then you're immediately able to get charge from whatever your opponent does to counterattack against you. But Javier kind of needs the CO power to stay, and so if the CO power is active and Javier is still your primary CO after using the CO power, then whatever your secondary CO is not going to be gaining that charge. And so that means your secondary CO is probably not going to be that much of a factor. So by playing Javier, you're kind of gimping whatever your secondary CO is. And so that's why Javier has been allowed, even though Javier is normally a tier 1 CO. The Javier's synergy with other COs is going to be nerfed because of the way the charge mechanic works. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so that's Javier. Let me get rid of this screen here so we can watch some matches happen in the background as we talk about the rest of these COs. Okay, so another CO that is in the top 3 is going to be Max. Max is the only tier 2 CO available, and I don't really think it's super hard to understand why Max would be something that you would consider picking. Max is a very straightforward CO to play. You kind of mass tanks, mass recons, max smash units into units, plus 20 vehicles, and do what you got to do. And additionally, you get copter movement as well with your CO powers. So he's pretty strong. And the other tier 2 COs not really allowed, because global damage is very, very strong because of the charge mechanics that we kind of talked about. And so Max is not going to have to go up against Olaf or Eagle, and Max does very badly against both Olaf and Eagle on most maps. But since they're gone, and the only potential other matchup for Max at a higher tier is going to be against Javier, that's actually a decent matchup for Max, because Max has so much extra firepower that it negates somewhat the extra defense of Javier. The whole reason that Javier is good is because when you have units on cities, often it's going to take 3 attacks to kill them, especially infantry. But Max has enough extra bonus firepower on the vehicles where you're still going to be able to clear infantry off of cities with like a recon and an infantry, assuming you've got your comm tower, and to be able to fight into tanks on cities and not necessarily be afraid of the extra defense that Javier is going to use to wear you down. So I think Max, definitely a good pick. And then another pick that we've seen a bunch is Drake. And the idea with Drake is that you are playing for the global damage, and so you want to basically build up charge as fast as you can, throw out that superpower, and then do two damage to everything, switch to your secondary CO, and then you're immediately building up charge as Drake again, even though he's the secondary CO, so he's only getting half charge, but then you can swap back to him and get charge quickly and just utilize your secondary CO more as well with whatever power you've built up while Drake has been charging up the super. So that's kind of the idea of all three of the COs. There's one CO that we haven't seen really at all that I thought about for a little bit, and I want to explain why this CO hasn't really been picked and why it's probably smart. And that is Kindle. We haven't seen any Kindle. And the reason that Kindle is probably not a great pick with these tiers is that Kindle's matchups against both Max and Javier are pretty difficult. Javier wants to sit on cities, and you'd think that'd be good for Kindle, but Kindle actually has to get charge before Kindle can actually punish sitting on cities. So there's going to be a pretty substantial phase of the game where you're skirmishing with infantry, and there's not a whole lot of vehicle fighting. And if Kindle's powers aren't online yet, then the day-to-day helps a little bit, but if Javier just sits on the cities, then you're not sitting on the cities, and it's going to be pretty difficult to deal with. And additionally, Max, with the extra firepower, just kind of tends to run over Kindle, especially once the powers come online. Max can kind of zone Kindle out pretty hard and deal a pretty devastating opening salvo with like a vehicle engagement, and there's not really a whole lot Kindle can do about that. So with 2 of the 3 matchups being pretty unfavorable for Kindle, I don't really think it's wise to pick her, although I think Kindle would do pretty fine against a Drake, but people have been choosing kind of a wide variety of strategies, so it's pretty hard to assume that your opponent is going to be picking Drake. I think that's a pretty big risk. So I'm not seeing a whole lot of Kindle. I don't think anybody's picked Kindle, actually. And the way the matchups tend to work, in my opinion, is Javier is really good against Drake. Really, really good against Drake. Because the infantry engagements are massively favorable. And you can kind of keep Drake's charge down just by focusing on the infantry engagements and kind of roll the game before Drake's powers are coming online. I think Max is pretty good against Javier, and Drake is pretty decent against Max for the same reason that Olaf is pretty good against Max. You still got to play it right, and none of these matchups are so dominant that if you end up kind of losing the rock paper scissors, then you're not going to be kind of screwed or anything like that. Like, you still have a chance to win by playing well and playing your CO well, but there are kind of slight edges in that triangle, at least in my opinion. That being said, this is only the primary COs. For the secondary COs, the picks have been all over the place. And to be perfectly honest, I think in this scenario and on this map, the secondary COs almost don't matter at all. And especially if you're playing Javier, then your secondary CO is almost entirely meaningless, in my opinion, because you basically just want to play Javier the whole game. And if you're playing Javier the whole game, then you're using Javier's CO power and you're still staying as Javier, and then your secondary CO will not build up charge. And so the only really reason you'd want to switch to your secondary CO is to use a power with the charge you built up. But if your secondary CO is not building up charge, then you kind of never want to switch to them. For Max and for Drake, it's a little bit different. You're going to end up having more charge, and when you burn your Max power, and especially your Drake power, you're going to want to switch to your secondary CO and maybe fire off a power with the charge you've built up. but that's only if you're playing those two COs. So, especially as Javier, some people have said that, as Javier, you should be playing with Sammy as your secondary CO. And you can do that because it'll strengthen your capture game and make you a little bit more resilient to harass in the early game. But the idea that with Javier, you're going to build Sammy up to get a victory march off is really, really unlikely. Victory march needs a lot of charge, and paired with Javier, that's almost never going to happen. So I think you can pretty much pick any secondary CO you want with Javier, and it's probably not going to matter. With the other COs, Rip picked Drake Jake, and that's pretty strong because the CO names rhyme, and so there's like some synergy going on there. I think if you're picking Drake, you probably don't want to pick Jess, because then you're always going to have gimped copters to some extent, and that's kind of limiting your ability to utilize them. So having Jake, I think is pretty reasonable because you're going to get that firepower bonus through copters, and so you can still build copters, and then if you want to utilize them more, then you can just play as Jake for a little bit. And that this is a decent map for Jake. Max can do whatever he wants. We see Max Sammy in this game. I think that's okay, but Max being able to build Sammy up to a victory march is also kind of asking a lot. Oftentimes, Max games get decided well before that ends up happening, because just of the way that the CO powers tend to get sequenced when the games play out. You're going to get Max with like a CO power, and then usually after that it's going to do a lot of damage, and so whatever your opponent's primary CO is, they're going to get their superpower off or a CO power after that, and then maybe their secondary CO gets some sort of power off, and then finally maybe then you've built up to a Sammy victory march, but you've also kind of eaten 2 powers from your opponent, so likely that by that point you're already winning or you're already losing enough that the victory march is not going to really change the trajectory of the game. So when you have pretty powerful COs paired with tier 4 COs, I don't think the tier 4 COs really matter that much, and I would not spend too much time racking your brain over which secondary CO to pick on this map. Okay, then that covers the CO picks and gives you a decent idea of the meta for this round, at least in my opinion. Keep in mind that tags are pretty unexplored territory, at least in Fog, and I've only played 2 Fog tag maps ever, so I'm learning along with everybody else, but you can agree, you can disagree, it's totally fine, and I'm sure I'll be continuing to learn things as we get into more maps and more rounds in this tournament. So this map is Redemption World. This is a map that I've covered in other videos, so we're not going to be doing a map breakdown. And I actually think almost every single map in the Quack Cup I've covered it already in other videos. So that's kind of nice. That'll allow us to keep this video a little bit shorter than we would with the full map breakdown. I will try to remember to put a link to the original video that contains the map breakdown for this map in case you want to hear more about that, but we will not be doing that here. So let's hop into the game. So in this game, I'm going to be playing with Javier and Jess, and my opponent has gone for the interesting pick of Drake and Flak. And so in the introduction to this video, I did leave you with that hypothetical scenario of whether a tier 4 Lux CO in the hands of a 1700 player could beat a tier 1 CO utilized by an 1100 ELO player. And that's going to remain hypothetical for you to think about, because we won't be seeing that in this game. That's right, I have the tier 1 CO. So this is going to be very interesting. So on this map, let's just kind of get into this, and I'll kind of talk about my build as I go along. Redemption World, I think, has some moderate FTA in terms of just the capture order for player 1 gets to the contested cities a little bit quicker and with less risk than player 2. It's not a huge thing, but I would pretty much always prefer to be player 1 on this map if I could choose. And one of the challenges of having videos out on this map before is that there's a lot of there's Elagatua builds for both player 1 and player 2 available on this map. And so I kind of went into this game assuming that my opponent would be stealing one of my builds to use against me. So I tried to come up with a counter build to my own build, and I'm going to be attempting to wait for the player 1 infantry to come from here and then go into these forests and then jump over to this city. And if that's done in the same way that my build did it in, I think, Smacky Cup 3, and I forget exactly what turn that infantry will arrive here, but basically we're going to be setting up so that we have an artillery and a recon in position to punish that should that happen. And beyond that, we're just going to be, we're starting off as Jess just because we don't have a comm tower, so there's no real reason to be at Javier until we actually get our comm tower. But we're going to be opening up artillery because we need the artillery to be built first in order to get it where we need to get it. And we're not really going for early captures on this city. In other builds that I've done, I've rushed the city pretty quickly, but I feel like the meta is so strong towards building early tanks from this base that it's pretty rare for there to be successful contests on this city, because that requires a recon usually to end up attacking from one of these tiles, which makes it very vulnerable for it to get insta smashed by a tank that is just reinforcing from here, and everybody's building tanks from there, so it's really likely that that would happen. So I don't really feel the need to rush this, so I'm going to just be going for a pretty income optimized opener in my capture phase, and be opening artillery recon. And I think in one of my replays I used artillery recon to try and lock down this city, but in this game I'm going to be using it to lock down over here. We'll see how that plays out. Not seeing anything so far. And we're going to be rushing this infantry, so we're skipping capturing this. We want to get this infantry up here so that we can try to like lock down this city pretty quickly. And then if we get this city and this city, then we're basically already at half map, and only good things can happen from there. And we are going to be getting this comm tower pretty early. It's going to make capturing this city a little bit delayed, but this city is not generally contestable, and especially as Javier, once we get that comm tower, we're going to be able to lock down our side of the map pretty handily. So I want this comm tower now, because next turn this infantry is going to be going to capture this, and so I want the extra defense for that capture attempt, just in case a stray recon shows up. Additionally, we do have a money for a tank this turn, so we will be able to protect this capture attempt even though we did 2 vehicles on the other side of the map before building a tank here. So that is kind of the benefit of delaying this capture, is that we're getting the defense from Javier, and we're also still having a vehicle available to defend our capture. It does mean that we are pretty much giving up this city, but that's why we're pushing this city really aggressively. We only need one of them, and this can be a target for us to flip later on. So we built the recon from the front base, and one of the benefits of building from the front base is you can get to both this tile and this tile in 2 recon moves, depending on how you route it over there. So we're just going to see what's going on, and we see this infantry capturing this city already. So this probably means that actually nothing is going to get over to this city very quickly, because this infantry would be the infantry that went to capture this airport and then has gone on like this mountain and then to here, instead of going to this tile and then down to the forest to go to this way. So looks like my trap is not actually going to do anything, but at least I do have this infantry pushed up pretty aggressively, so I will just probably be able to take this city uncontested anyway, and that's not terrible either. We're just finishing up our captures. And now the artillery is just kind of hanging out, because there's not a whole lot to do. I could have, if I really thought about trapping this city here, but if there was like a recon or a tank to show up to hit my artillery, and if I had like this guy a little bit closer and I could block the city next turn, I might think about it, but I just don't really want to fight yet, unless it's over in this corner. And so this city does get captured. So if I had set up my artillery a little bit more aggressively, it would have been pretty nice, but oh well. So we go straight for this. And we got a second recon, because these strong side recons can get to the center very, very quickly, so it's nice to have multiple ones. And then these tanks get to the fight very, very quickly. And so now we're starting to get our contested properties locked down. So we're likely to get this one based on what we've seen so far. We're going to get this one, so that's nice. And this one is like kind of the last contested property that potentially could get harassed, although this tends not to be that contested. And from here, what I want to do is I kind of want to shift everything over in this direction and consolidate around here. And I want to just do a big infantry push over here. We want to put a lot of pressure on the airport side, because we're playing against Drake and Flak. And so that means that air units are going to be total garbage for our opponent, which makes this weak side especially weak. So initially we're Javier, which means our infantry are especially strong with the extra defense. So we just want to throw everything at this side. We want to maybe try and bully this city, get infantry on the city. It's going to make it very difficult for our opponent to defend. And traditionally, the way you can defend this city really easily is by putting in artillery in this forest here. But Javier takes reduced damage from ranged attacks. So even artillery in this forest is not really going to be that helpful for defending this city against a push from Javier. So we start shifting this tank over, but we do have another tank that is going to be here just to protect this capture in case this gets harassed by a recon or something. And we're just playing very defensively over on the weak side, not trying to extend to this property at all. We're just letting it float out there. Our opponent can have it because we got the other one. And then you generally want an anti-air pushing into this weak side, even though Drake Copters are terrible. You just want to have an anti-air. Anti-airs are so versatile that even if no air units are built, there's a good chance that being able to like one-hit KO an infantry is going to end up being pretty helpful later on. Additionally, our opponent has switched to Flak. Don't know why. I don't know if they're just memeing or if this is a strategic decision or whether they're just going to switch back once the fighting starts to get Drake charge. But I have no idea what's going on. And we see a recon show up and hit my infantry on the city, which is interesting. This feels like a trap. Oops. But the problem with a play like this is this feels like it's begging me to put a tank on this city and kill the recon, right? And the reason you do something like this is if you have an artillery that's like right here, that's ready to shoot a tank that ends up on this city. But the problem is that I'm Javier. So if my tank is on a city, it doesn't care if there's artillery shooting at it because it's barely going to take any damage anyway. So if this is bait, there's virtually no situation where I would ever turn down the bait. Because even if there's like a bunch of tanks to hit my tank on the city, it can almost never be a bad trade for me. So I'm just always going to take it. Additionally, damaging this infantry doesn't really accomplish anything. Just kind of move him away, and I'm very surprised that there is no artillery waiting for me over here. But now I've got a tank on a city, and I just killed a recon for free, so seems good. And we saw the infantry back up from here. So it seems like he kind of wants me to push into here, but we're not quite all collected yet. We probably need to wait a turn before we're really ready to actually assault and start putting pressure on this area. Initially, I'm interested in seeing what is going to happen over on this right side, because we saw this infantry go into this woods. And so there's a chance that this infantry may just plonk right into our infantry on the city. So I've got this recon over here kind of on standby to play defense if that happens. And so we're just going to be chilling. Oh, and we moved this guy next to the forest. I think I did this exact same bait against Sidewinder in the Smacky Cup 3 semifinals, where I basically moved a unit next to this forest and was like, hey, come kill my weakened unit next to the forest. And then actually I've got an artillery pointing at the forest. It was a good play. Might as well do it again. And lots of tanks. So this is the turn in this game where I started playing on my phone, because I saw this pipe seam take an artillery hit, and I was like, okay, this is no longer that serious of a game. My opponent is playing Flak. I think my opponent's just memeing, so I'm not gonna take this too seriously. I'm just gonna. I think I was on vacation when I was playing this game, just being very, very casual about it. So from this point on, things become very loose in terms of execution because I'm playing on my phone. So this infantry bonks here. And I mean, this is the power of Javier, right? This infantry on a plains And it's Flak, right? Like if you low roll the damage, it's not a fun time. And now all this is in infantry range. No vehicles in sight. We see a tank on the city, but it's really far back. We can basically just ignore that. And another one over here, but this guy is now disconnected from the fight that's happening in the middle, so he can't really assist. So seems good. Time to destroy a lot of infantry and set up a push on this city here. See another tank here, which is fine. As long as our tanks are on high defense terrain, we don't really care if there's a lot of other tanks. So we got this tank in the forest, which is for Javier is basically a city. This tank is covered by artillery. We've got a little wall here, so walling pretty good with Javier. These recons are a little bit exposed, but this recon is behind the infantry wall, which doesn't necessarily make him safe, but if you kill this infantry and then you attack the recon, well, then you're in range of the artillery. And unfortunately, I run out of vehicles to be able to finish this guy off, but I just gotta do some damage, and now this is very safe. And more recons, anti-air's in position, and we're not going to finish this capture next turn. This is going to get interrupted for sure, but over the next turn or two, this fight is going to start to tilt pretty strongly in our favor, at least based on the way things are going. We've already killed 5 units and lost none, so pretty good start. Now we're just going to start to mix in a copter. I haven't built any air units. It's day 10, so it's about time to start doing that. And a weak side recon, because now that we've won this fight, we want to start thinking about getting this side city over here, because that's the kind of the next objective, that we're going to force all the vehicles over here because we've seen a lot of vehicles. So if there's a lot of vehicles here, that means that this area is probably not very strong. So set up a little side push going this way in the next turn or two. Just thinking 2 or 3 turns in the future, this pipe seam gets hit again, which is a thing you can do, I suppose. But this is what Javier infantry on city. Very, very strong. Very, very difficult to dislodge. Let me see. Many, many tanks. Recon shows up here. Unfortunately, we can't really do anything about this, but recon plus infantry, not going to kill a Javier infantry on a city unless there's really, really insane luck rolls from Flak. And a normal CO would not be able to, it's not even a luck roll, I don't think. Or maybe it is. It's like a really, really low chance to kill, if it is. So send the recon in just to kind of see what's up. And we see a medium tank. It's not outrageously surprising to see a medium tank, but obviously we see it before we move anything else. That's the best time to see medium tank. And we don't really need to be afraid of the medium tank because we have a artillery. And as long as we kind of keep stuff around the artillery and we set up a wall, the medium tank is not really going to be able to get any value. And we do a rare join cap here on the infantry because this is like, we don't want to siege this much longer. Like, we want to convert this now so that we can kind of disengage, because it seems like our opponent's probably teching pretty hard from this side here, and they're actually fairly consolidated in this area. And so really, like, our objective needs to be focusing on here. And if we don't get this next turn, then we really need to just kind of back off a little bit and just attack elsewhere instead of trying to like really bang our heads into this this city here. But we're gonna commit pretty strongly to try and get it this next turn. And if we don't, then we'll reevaluate. We send in, and we see that this city is actually uncaptured. So it's pretty surprising. Like, we kind of gave it away for free, and our opponent didn't want it. So that's fine. And then we're just going to set up this artillery kind of out of range of the medium tank so that it can't reach it, but still covering a lot of our vehicles. And just, it's a big blob of Javier. And this is the power of Javier. Like, we've killed 8 units right now. But the amount of charge that has been generated is pretty low, because it's just the infantry fighting is going really strongly in favor of Javier. And that's what he does. That's what that defense gives you. You win the infantry fight. And we build a second artillery to complement our first one, just in case there's more tech coming, which probably is, because this pipe team is broken now. So now all the vehicles can kind of stream in here, which is fine, I guess. But it's not really going to matter unless he can deny this capture this turn, because once I get the city, I'm not really obligated to fight on this weak side anymore. Recon goes on the city, but I should be able to clear that next turn. The tanks are going to clear out my recon wall, which is fine, because they absorbed a lot of hits, and now the medium tank comes in to hit the infantry. But not only is this in range of the artillery, but this is not even enough damage to actually prevent the capture. So the join cap actually ended up being valuable in this case. But the wall got destroyed, but it did its job, because now this counterattack is going to be pretty fierce. And I still got the objective that I was committing for. So we flip the city, and now we want to basically end up with CO power and just do like a ton of damage. And we're going to get first hits with basically all of our tanks, and that should allow things to get pretty devastating. Keep in mind, we're still fighting against Flak for some reason. So I do a sack into this recon because it improves the odds of me getting this kill. I didn't actually do any calculation on this. I just assumed that sacking that infantry would be enough to make this a kill without bothering to get the rest of the CO power. And I was wrong. If I had known, I went back after the fact and figured out what the odds were. I think it was only like it was basically a coin flip to kill this guy. If I had known that it was actually a coin flip, I probably would have sequenced this a little bit differently so that I got CO power first to actually guarantee that this got cleared off. Because now I can't capture it with this infantry now. I wanted to capture it this turn. But that's mobile phone gaming for you. You see another medium tank here, but this artillery gets a massive shot on that medium tank. And this medium tank, all his contribution was damaging an infantry, and then he gets shelled by an artillery. So it's a rough life. And we lose one hit KO rolls on both of these infantry, because it just seems like that's always how it has to be. But it's a pretty devastating fight. Now we've got CO power up, so we're going to be getting 30% defense this turn, and our opponent's going to have to attack into that. Flak super possibly a thing, which could be interesting, but like Flak doesn't have stuff to be able to utilize it. Like, the whole idea of using a Luxio is that you have a lot of infantry that are full HP, and you just kind of send them into vehicles and hope things go well. But I've killed so much infantry so far. Like, I mean, it's 13-5, right? I've killed 11 infantry. The unit count is just not strong enough to sustain even good rolls with Flak. And we're going to build a Neo tank just because we see a lot of medium tanks, but we've got more money, so we can afford it. And I base skip just to get it out, because, I mean, we can all see where this game is going, and I can too. This guy gets interrupted, but it's okay. Just delays it for a turn. 6/6. That's the power of CO power. Pretty strong. And no Flak super yet. But yeah, I mean, we see nothing here that inclines us to stop trading. Like, we might as well just keep trading as much as we can. Eventually, Drake is going to get superpower, so we kind of want to just trade as much as possible. And we're pushing these secondary cities that generally aren't contested unless things get pretty clowny. But I'd say pretty clowny describes this game pretty accurately. So we are, under normal circumstances, this would be a ludicrous overextension, but we are winning the fight so decisively that it actually doesn't matter. And then we can capture this city, which is definitely not contested under normal circumstances, but we've got enough of a unit count lead that basically we can just throw infantry at cities, and inevitably some of them are going to end up being undeniable. This would be the StarCraft equivalent of attack move to the opponent's side of the map, but here comes the Flak superpower. So there's an artillery in this forest. I actually saw this go in here, I think. I knew it was in there, but this guy that went in range was able to trade for another tank, so I was like, fine. And we see a third medium tank show up, so that's fine. And we see a copter show up with a really good roll, by the way, on this tank. And that's another pretty good roll for the anti-air on the infantry city there. And that's a decent roll too. Because I keep in mind, Flak super, like, these rolls can be anything can happen, including nothing. But pretty decent rolls for Flak here. But anti-air is still alive, so copter's not going to do anything. And importantly, we are now flipping like all these cities. So we're at 26k on I think it's a 21k even income map. So this one is there's only one way that this can end. And now switching over to Drake now, so our opponent is going to be building up charge, and now that we got all these cities, we actually don't need to continue pushing into here. We can kind of back up a little bit, and I just want to wait for my Neo tank to get into range so that we can start dealing with these medium tanks. And we build a second Neo tank because why not? We've seen 3 and we are very, very rich. Medium tank goes for the infantry here, which is unfortunately out of range of my Neo tank. But we get to flip this city too, so now we're at 27k, which is pretty ridiculous. We just send an infantry in to see what's going on. This recon, thank you for your service. You killed a unit, and now you will probably pay. But that's okay, because we've got CO power. I mean, why not? Neo tank kills an infantry. Unlucky not to kill there. I actually don't know if that was unlucky not to kill there. I have no idea. We see a bunch of mechs here, which is fine. We're just there's not a whole lot of strategy here. We're just kind of setting units into units, and we're gonna get Drake superpower next turn, but it's still Drake superpower into our CO power, so we're gonna have a huge amount of defense on everything. But if we look at the stats, it's 27 to 11, in terms of unit kills. So if it weren't clear how this one we're going. We do need to build some more anti-airs though, because we only have this guy. And he's... I don't think this anti-air is going to make it through this next turn. I build a T-copter for fun. So we get super powered. This recon somehow survives because our opponent didn't have vision due to the rain, I think. Mech bonks into the recon. There's some silly... This game has become very, very silly. If it didn't... If Flak being the primary CO for the first, like, 50% of the game wasn't silly enough, it is continuing to be silly. And now Flak is back. And we're just going to be cleaning up some stuff here. Clean up infantry, and we're going to set up for the CO cap. Or the HQ cap, rather. So all of our stuff is kind of beat up, but 1 HP units require attacks to be destroyed. And we've got a lot more stuff than our opponent does. The CO power comes through here. Pretty good roll there on that mech on the infantry. I gotta say, Flak has been doing okay on the rolls so far, but at this point, there's like no units over here anymore. And so we can just build a little wall. CO power. And then we block the HQ here. And copter bonks into the recon, and that's going to be the end. So, oh, I built a sub. I should have pointed that out. I built a sub. So I don't know if I've ever built a sub in a match before. That may be the first sub I've ever built in Advanced Wars by Web. So anyway, this was an entertaining game. I think I feel like I covered the strategy of this game with as much depth as it deserved. It was kind of a silly game. Probably, definitely memeing on my side. Definitely seemed like a lot of memeing by my opponent. So, hey. Memeing is fun. It's okay to just have a fun game. It's Quack Cup, so everybody's doing weird stuff. So, no complaints about that. But that's pretty much all for this one. We'll call it here. Next round is going to be a little more interesting with some of the CO choices. Some of the more powerful COs are going to make their way back in. Though still no tier zeros, but look forward to that one when that rolls around. So that's going to do it for me. Enjoy this very, very brief video, and we'll see you for the next one. Have a good night.